opened the drawer once, twice, a third time, my hands shaking. My passport wasn't there. And just like that, every plan I had ever made, every hope, every dream, shattered in an instant. Someone had hidden it. Someone close enough to know exactly how much that little booklet meant to me. In less than 4 hours, my flight would leave without me. And if I missed it, everything I was running toward would disappear forever. But this wasn't just about a lost passport. It was about betrayal, about a war that had already begun. And I wasn't going down without a fight. The rain hammered against the windows like a warning drum, each drop echoing the frantic beat of my heart. I sank to the floor, back pressed against the cold wall, the rough paint scraping my skin but anchoring me in the moment. My breath came in shallow gasps, fogging the air before me. Why? Why now? Why would they do this? The faces of those I trusted flashed behind my closed eyelids. Friends, family, colleagues, smiles that hid sharp knives. Whispered conversations that stopped as I entered the room. The way their eyes flickered when I asked about the passport, a hesitation I'd brushed off. Foolishly. I clenched my fists until my nails bit into my palms. The truth was undeniable. They wanted me to fail, to stay trapped here, powerless and forgotten. A sudden noise shattered the silence, a soft click at the door. My head snapped up, muscles tense, every nerve screaming. Was it one of them? Or someone else? The door creaked open just a crack, a sliver of shadow slipping through. I held my breath. "It's not too late," a voice whispered, low and urgent. I didn't know who she was, but something in her eyes, a fierce, unwavering resolve, cut through the fog of despair. "Then help me," I breathed. Her nod was almost imperceptible. "You're going to need more than luck." And with that, the storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to break inside me. The stranger stepped fully into the dimly lit room, the soft thud of her boots muffled by the threadbare rug beneath her feet. Her silhouette was framed by the narrow sliver of light leaking under the door, a sharp contrast to the murky shadows that pooled in the corners. Her eyes, sharp, unblinking, locked with mine, and for a moment, the chaotic storm inside my mind stilled. I searched her face for answers, for hope, but found only a hard edge, forged by secrets and battles I could barely imagine. "I'm Mira," she said, voice calm but edged with urgency. "And if you want to get that passport back, you're going to have to stop trusting the people around you." I blinked, the words sinking in like cold water. Trust had already been ripped away from me, replaced by suspicion and fear. But I hadn't been ready to face the full truth. That betrayal wasn't just personal, it was part of something bigger. Mira pulled a small device from her coat, a slim black rectangle that glowed faintly with a blue light. "This," she said, holding it out, "is a tracker. Someone's been watching you, not just your so-called friends, the kind of people who don't want you flying out of this city, out of their reach." I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at me to run, to hide, to scream. But the storm raging outside mirrored the one within, fierce and unrelenting. The cold bite of the room seeped into my skin, but something warmer bloomed deep inside, a spark, a flicker of resistance. "Why me?" I whispered. "Why now?" Mira hesitated, her eyes darkening. "Because you have something they want, something you don't even realize yet." Her words were a puzzle piece I didn't know how to fit. I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but all I could do was nod, the weight of desperation crushing down on me. Outside, the rain intensified, streaking the windows with glistening rivulets that distorted the neon city lights into a kaleidoscope of colors. Reds bleeding into blues, greens melting into yellows. It was as if the world itself was crying out, reflecting the chaos that had become my life. I stood slowly, the rough floorboards creaking beneath my feet as I crossed to the window. The city sprawled endlessly beyond, towering skyscrapers piercing the clouds, streets pulsing with life and secrets. Somewhere out there was the key to my freedom, and the hands that had stolen it. "Tell me what I have to do," I said, voice steady despite the storm inside. Mira stepped closer, pulling a folded map from her coat. The paper crackled softly, worn and marked with symbols I didn't recognize. "First," she said, "you disappear. Lay low, trust no one. Then we find who took your passport. And we take back everything they stole." I looked down at the empty space on the dresser again, the absence of that tiny book more profound than ever. But now, for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't dared hope for. A chance. A beginning. The hours stretched like shadows creeping over the city as Mira and I planned. Her voice was a low murmur against the backdrop of rain and distant sirens. Each word was a lifeline tossed into the turbulent sea of my unraveling world. She showed me how to erase my digital footprint, how to vanish into the cracks of the city. No social media, no credit card use, no calls, just shadows and silence. I thought of my family, my so-called friends, the people whose smiles hid daggers. I thought of the suitcase packed and waiting by the door, filled with everything I needed, and nothing I could use now. "Why are you helping me?" I asked when the doubt clawed its way back. Mira's gaze hardened. "Because I've been where you are. Because I've lost everything to people like them." Her words burned with truth and pain. And somehow, in that moment, I understood. We were both prisoners in a game far larger than us. Outside, dawn began to seep through the storm clouds. The rain softened, turning into a gentle drizzle that left the streets shimmering with wet light. The city woke slowly, unaware of the battle raging within one small apartment. I packed what little I could carry, an old notebook, a worn photograph, a small knife Mira insisted I keep. Each item felt like a thread pulling me back from the edge. As I slipped on my jacket, the cold air outside bit into my skin, sharp and real. I paused at the door, hand on the knob, heart pounding. "After Rebirth," Mira whispered, her voice almost lost in the morning breeze, "you'll never be the same." I opened the door and stepped into a world that had already moved on without me. The city was a living beast, its streets pulsing with restless energy beneath the pale morning light. Neon signs that once blazed like fiery sentinels in the night had dimmed to soft, flickering reminders of yesterday's chaos. But to me, the city now felt like a labyrinth, every corner a potential trap, every shadow hiding a story I was desperate to avoid. I moved through the streets like a ghost, Mira's words echoing relentlessly in my mind, "Disappear. Trust no one." But to vanish from a life you'd meticulously built wasn't just a matter of turning off a light switch. It was more like tearing out pages of your own story, one by one, until you were left only with a blank cover and an uncertain future. My reflection flickered in a rain-speckled shop window. The face staring back at me was unfamiliar, pale, tired, framed by tangled dark hair. My eyes held the same fierce determination, but beneath them lurked a haunting question: who am I if all I've known is gone? The plan was simple, but execution demanded precision. First, no phone calls. My smartphone, a device that had connected me to the world, was now a liability. I wiped it clean, deleting every contact, every message, every trace of my existence, and tossed it deep into a dumpster behind a coffee shop. The harsh clang as it hit metal sounded like a final severance. Second, no social media. I sat in a crowded cafe, watching the world scroll past on screens, and deactivated every account. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all vanished into digital oblivion. It felt like breathing underwater, suffocating but necessary. Third, no credit cards. I withdrew every last bit of cash from my bank, but the gesture felt hollow. In a world that thrived on digital transactions, cash was a fragile shield. Mira's presence was a quiet anchor amid the chaos. She knew the streets, the alleys, the hidden corners where no one asked questions. She was a phantom herself, her past carved from shadows and broken promises. "Safe houses," she explained, her voice low as we ducked into an unmarked door tucked between a closed florist and a shuttered bakery. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and lavender. "Places where they can't find you?" I nodded, the words heavy with truth. We weren't just hiding from people anymore. We were running from a network, a web spun with secrets, lies, and power plays far beyond my comprehension. Days blurred into nights. I learned to move unseen, blending into crowds with a practiced ease I never thought I'd need. The city's pulse became a rhythm I could follow, a chaotic dance of honking cars, distant sirens, and footsteps echoing on wet concrete. Every sound was a clue, every glance a potential threat. I carried Mira's tracker in my pocket, a small lifeline and a reminder of how deep I'd fallen into this game. One evening, as dusk settled over the skyline in hues of burnt orange and smoky purple, Mira pulled me aside in a narrow alley. The scent of damp brick and melting tar filled the air. "They're watching," she whispered. "Closer than you think." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. Weeks passed. The missing passport was just the first wound. The real battle was learning who I was beneath the ashes of my former life, and what I was capable of becoming. I found small victories in stolen moments, a smile from a stranger, the warmth of a cup of coffee in a rundown diner, the soft brush of a breeze against my cheek. But those moments were fleeting, like sparks in the night, beautiful but destined to fade. And then, one night, the world shifted. I was alone, waiting in a crowded train station filled with the hum of restless travelers and the metallic scent of rail oil. My eyes scanned faces, some hopeful, some tired, some filled with secrets like my own. Suddenly, a voice cut through the noise. "You're not safe here." I turned sharply to see a man stepping out of the crowd, his eyes cold and unreadable. Behind him, two figures emerged, one male, one female, faces obscured by shadows but unmistakably familiar. The game was no longer about hiding. Chapter 3. The Faces Behind the Shadows. The man's words lingered in the humid air like a dark prophecy. "You're not safe here." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs were rooted to the cold, cracked concrete of the train station platform. The noise of the bustling crowd around me blurred into a distant hum, like a storm receding into the background, while the eye fixed itself on the threat before me. I squinted against the harsh overhead lights, trying to make out details through the shadows. The man's face was sharp and angular, his jaw clenched tight enough to whiten his knuckles. His eyes bore into me, cold, calculating, unyielding. The two figures behind him moved with a predator's grace. A woman whose dark hair fell like a curtain of night around her face, and a man with a scar cutting across his temple. Recognition flared sharply in my chest. They were the ghosts of my past, the architects of my downfall, the ones who had hidden my passport, stolen my future, and smiled in my face while doing it. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my trembling hands. This was no coincidence. They had followed me here, tracked me through the labyrinth of shadows I'd tried so desperately to slip into. A sudden rush of cold air swept through the station as the train screeched into the platform, its metallic wheels grinding against the rails like the grinding of fate itself. People surged forward, a wave of bodies pulling me back from the edge of confrontation. Mira's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and urgent in my ear. "Move, now." Without hesitation, I turned and sprinted through the throng, the pounding of my heartbeat pounding in my ears like a war drum. My breath came fast and ragged, each step a battle against the rising tide of panic. We burst out of the station into the damp night. The rain had stopped, but the streets gleamed wet and slick beneath the scattered glow of street lamps. Mira pulled me into a narrow alleyway between two crumbling buildings, the smell of mold and decay wrapping around us like a shroud. "Who were they?" I gasped, clutching my chest. "Enemies," she said simply, her eyes scanning the dark like a hawk. "And not just yours. They're tied to the people who took your passport and everything else." I shivered, the cold not entirely from the night air. The weight of their presence pressed down like a physical force, dragging me back to memories I tried to bury. Whispers behind closed doors, shattered promises, the suffocating betrayal of those I once called friends. We moved quickly through the winding back streets, Mira's footsteps sure and silent beside mine. Her coat flapped behind her, a dark banner in the muted light. I kept my head down, every shadow suddenly suspicious, every distant sound a potential alarm. "How did you find me?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Mira hesitated, then replied, "I've been watching too. They think they're invisible, but no one is untouchable. Not in this city, not anymore." Her words chilled me, but they also sparked something fierce deep within, a resolve to take back control of my story, no matter the cost. We arrived at a tiny cafe, its neon sign buzzing faintly, casting a sickly green glow over the rain-speckled sidewalk. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of strong coffee and old leather. Mira pulled me into a shadowed booth, the vinyl seat cracked and worn. She slid a small folder across the table. "Look." Inside were photographs, grainy, but unmistakable. Images of me, meeting with people, walking down streets, sitting in cafes. Someone had been tracking my every move long before I met Mira. And worse, images of my betrayers meeting with strangers, exchanging envelopes, whispers between powerful players. "They're part of something bigger," Mira said, voice low and urgent. "An organization that controls this city's power, financial, political, even the airlines." My breath caught. Airlines. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. My dreams of escape, of soaring above the clouds, had been snatched away not by chance, but by those who ruled behind closed doors. The night deepened as we pored over the documents and plans Mira had gathered. Contacts, safe houses, secret meetings. Each piece added another thread to the tangled web of conspiracy. Hours passed, marked only by the shifting shadows on the cracked ceiling. I felt the weight of exhaustion settle on my shoulders, but also a growing fire, the fierce hunger for justice, for rebirth. "Tomorrow," Mira said finally, "we start taking back what they stole." I nodded, the first true sense of purpose kindling in my chest. The passport was gone. But I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. And this time, I wouldn't just disappear. The first rays of dawn slipped hesitantly through the cracked blinds, casting pale stripes across the cluttered table where Mira and I had spent the night poring over plans and faces. The room smelled of stale coffee and cigarette smoke, faint traces of desperation mixed with determination. I sat back, rubbing my aching eyes, the weight of exhaustion settling in. But sleep was a luxury I could not afford. Not when every second brought my enemies closer. Mira's voice cut through the quiet like a sharpened blade. "We need to hit their weak point, the place they think is untouchable." I looked up, the sharpness in her eyes pulling me from the fog of fatigue. The airline, the word echoed in my mind. The very institution that had symbolized my freedom, the flights I dreamed of taking, the skies I longed to cross, was a fortress controlled by those who betrayed me. "They have power there," Mira continued. "Money, influence. They think it protects them. But it also blinds them. A slow, fierce resolve began to kindle inside me. This was no longer just about a stolen passport. It was about reclaiming every stolen piece of my life. We spent the day weaving through the city's underbelly, moving like shadows between forgotten warehouses and dimly lit cafes. Mira introduced me to a network of allies, people who lived on the fringes but held the keys to secrets powerful enough to shake the foundations of the airline empire. Each contact brought a fragment of knowledge, internal rivalries, corrupt executives, guarded passwords, the flow of illicit money. The deeper I delved, the more I realized how vast the conspiracy was, and how high the stakes. That night, I found myself standing atop a rooftop overlooking the sprawling headquarters of the airline. The building loomed like a monolith, its glass facade reflecting the neon glow of the city below. Lights flickered inside, silhouettes of figures moving with purpose. A storm was brewing overhead, distant thunder rolling like the growl of some ancient beast. Raindrops began to fall, tracing rivulets down the cold concrete. I closed my eyes, letting the rain wash over me, a baptism of pain and hope. The wind whispered promises of change, of power reclaimed, of a future forged by my own hands. Days turned into weeks. Each step forward was met with resistance, encrypted firewalls, hostile security, betrayals that cut deeper than any wound. But with Mira by my side, I learned to fight not just with fists, but with cunning and patience. Together, we crafted a plan to infiltrate the very heart of the airline, the executive offices, the nerve center where decisions were made and futures decided. The night before the operation, I sat alone in a small apartment, the air thick with anticipation. I traced the scars on my hands, reminders of battles fought and survived. I was no longer the woman who had lost her passport. I was becoming something new, stronger, fiercer, unstoppable. The morning came swift and unforgiving. Dressed in a sharp black suit that felt foreign yet empowering, I stepped into the elevator that would carry me to the top floor. The hum of the machinery matched the pounding of my heart. With every floor we passed, I shed the remnants of my past doubts. The doors slid open to a corridor bathed in sterile white light. The scent of polished wood and expensive cologne filled the air. Ahead, the executive offices awaited, the fortress that held my destiny. And I was ready to claim it. The elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a corridor that gleamed with cold perfection. Polished marble floors reflecting the fluorescent lights overhead, walls adorned with abstract art that spoke of wealth and control. Every step I took echoed sharply, a rhythm that matched the storm pounding relentlessly inside my chest. My fingers tightened around the folder Mira had given me, the access codes, floor plans, and employee schedules. It felt heavier than its weight, loaded with the hopes of reclaiming what had been stolen from me. Ahead, the reception area sat empty, the leather chairs pristine and untouched, the glass desk spotless. A security camera blinked red, dutifully watching every inch of this carefully curated world. I slipped on a pair of sleek black gloves, my breath shallow, senses heightened. The air smelled faintly of citrus and expensive cleaning products, a stark contrast to the grit and grime I'd learned to navigate outside these walls. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small device Mira had called the Scrambler. With trembling hands I activated it, and the camera's blinking light flickered, then went dark. The moment stretched taut like a wire. Heart hammering, I slipped past the desk, the silence wrapping around me like a shroud. Every creak, every muted footstep felt magnified. I moved with calculated grace down the hall, eyes scanning for motion sensors and patrol routes. The building's sterile calm belied the battles waging behind closed doors, whispers of deals struck in hushed tones, betrayals cloaked in smiles. Reaching the executive elevator, I swiped the forged ID card Mira had procured. The doors slid open, and I stepped inside, the metallic chill pressing against my skin. The elevator hummed upward, each floor ticking by with agonizing slowness. In that confined space, I felt the weight of every betrayal, every stolen dream, every locked door that had kept me grounded. The air grew thicker, the silence heavier. When the doors parted on the top floor, a sleek office space unfolded. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, skyscrapers piercing the mist like silent sentinels. But my gaze was drawn to the corner office, the domain of the man who had orchestrated my downfall. I crept through the maze of cubicles, the click of my heels muffled by the plush carpet. The faint murmur of voices drifted from a meeting room, laughter too sharp to be innocent. Pausing, I pressed myself against a wall, heart pounding so loud I feared it would betray me. There, behind frosted glass, I caught sight of them, my betrayers, huddled together, smiles cold and triumphant. The man with the scar leaned forward, voice dripping with venom. "She'll never get out of this city. Not without us." The woman with dark hair nodded, her smile cruel. "Our future is ours to control." A surge of fury rose within me, fierce and wild. Their confidence was their weakness. I had to act. Retrieving a small flash drive from my pocket, I plugged it into the nearest computer with practiced ease. The screen flickered to life, a maze of codes and files opening before me. Minutes stretched like hours as I searched for evidence, emails, financial records, surveillance footage. Every document was a thread I could pull to unravel their web. Suddenly, a soft beep sounded behind me. Frozen, I turned slowly. A man stood in the doorway, tall, sharply dressed, eyes narrowed. Recognition hit like a thunderclap. He was security. "No sudden moves," he said smoothly, voice low and dangerous. My mind raced. Every plan, every escape route felt miles away. But I wasn't the scared woman from before. Calmly, I met his gaze. "I'm just here to work," I said, voice steady. He studied me, suspicion flickering in his eyes. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a slow, knowing curve of his lips. "I'm here to help." Relief and confusion warred inside me. "Why?" He stepped aside. "Because sometimes, the enemy of my enemy is an ally." Together we moved swiftly, a silent pact forged in shadows. The fight was just beginning. The elevator hummed softly as we descended from the sleek executive floor back into the labyrinth of cubicles and flickering fluorescent lights. My heart still pounded from the close call, but with the security guard, who introduced himself simply as Elias, at my side, a cautious hope flickered amid the chaos. His presence was an enigma. Sharp, composed, yet somehow trustworthy in a place where trust was a currency spent far too freely and never repaid. "We don't have much time," Elias whispered, eyes scanning every corridor we passed. "They're already tightening security after what you did." I nodded, my fingers still clutching the flash drive, a fragile lifeline filled with evidence that could unravel their empire. Yet it was just a spark. The wildfire was still waiting to be lit. We slipped into a small forgotten conference room that smelled of stale air and long-forgotten meetings. Elias pulled out a laptop from his bag, rugged, battle-worn, like him, and quickly plugged in the flash drive. Lines of code and encrypted files cascaded across the screen. Mira's earlier warnings echoed. This was bigger than a stolen passport. This was a war waged in silence and shadows. "There," Elias said, pointing to a series of transactions, millions moving through shell companies, bribes disguised as consulting fees, and surveillance logs tracking me for months. They're laundering money, controlling airlines, politicians, even law enforcement. You're a threat because you know too much." A cold chill settled over me. My stolen future was just one thread tangled in a massive web of corruption and power. But Elias wasn't finished. "I've been on their payroll," he confessed quietly, voice heavy with regret. "But I want out. Helping you is my chance." His eyes searched mine for forgiveness, or at least understanding. I saw the weight of his confession, the battle between loyalty and conscience raging beneath his calm exterior. "You're not alone in this," I said firmly. "We fight together." Over the following days, Elias became my shadow and shield. His knowledge of the company's inner workings was invaluable, his contacts a secret lifeline. Through whispered phone calls and covert meetings in abandoned warehouses, we pieced together the extent of the conspiracy. The betrayers' hold on the airline was tight, but cracks had begun to show. Rival factions vying for power, leaked information stirring unrest, the first ripples of rebellion. One evening, beneath the neon glow of a rain-soaked street, Elias and I sat across from each other in a cramped diner. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and fried food, a strange comfort amid the storm. Our hands brushed as I passed him a file, a rare moment of human connection amid the Cold War we were waging. He looked up, eyes softening. "You're stronger than I thought." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I have to be..." The tension between us was undeniable, a fragile thread weaving hope into the darkness. But the fight was far from over. Messages arrived, threats cloaked as warnings. A car tailed me through empty streets. Every shadow seemed to watch, waiting. And behind it all, the puppeteers of my nightmare watched too, calculating, patient, ruthless. They believed I was weak. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The city's pulse quickened beneath a cloak of twilight, neon signs flickering as if warning of the storm about to break. Every step I took felt heavier, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me, every shadow a potential threat. Elias and I had grown close in the crucible of danger, a fragile alliance forged from necessity, trust cautiously rebuilt. But tonight the tension was different, electric, like the calm before a lightning strike. Our latest lead had brought us to a rundown hotel on the edge of the city, a place where deals were made in whispered tones and secrets traded like currency. Mira had warned us, this was where the inner circle gathered, where power was brokered and lives decided. We slipped inside, moving like ghosts through dimly lit corridors. The scent of cigarette smoke and cheap whiskey hung heavy, a stark contrast to the sterile offices we'd infiltrated before. At the end of a narrow hallway, a door stood ajar. Voices, low, urgent, spilled into the hallway. We pressed against the wall, straining to hear. "They're moving against her," a familiar voice said. My blood ran cold. "She's closer than we thought." the CEO position. It's ours to claim. My heart pounded as Elias pulled out his phone, snapping photos silently. The names, the dates, the scheming, it was all there. The moment we had been waiting for. But then, footsteps. Heavy. Approaching. We froze. The door burst open, and figures spilled into the hall, masked enforcers, hired muscle loyal to those who'd stolen my life. A surge of adrenaline flooded me. Elias grabbed my hand, pulling me back into the shadows. "We have to run," he hissed. We dashed through maze-like corridors, alarms blaring behind us. The sterile walls echoed with the pounding of our footsteps and the shouts of pursuers. Outside, rain had begun to fall, slicking the pavement and turning the city into a mirror of blurred lights. We ran, slipping through alleys and side streets, hearts hammering in sync. When we finally slowed, hidden beneath the skeletal frame of an abandoned building, I gasped for breath. Elias looked at me, eyes fierce and unguarded. "They're scared. We're hitting too close to home." His words ignited a fierce resolve within me. This fight wasn't just about me anymore. It was about toppling a corrupt empire, about justice for everyone crushed beneath their greed. But danger had a price. That night, as I lay in a safe house, my phone vibrated with a message that chilled me to the bone. "We know where you are. Leave or lose everything." I clenched my fists, blood pounding in my ears. I would not run. I would not hide. I would rise. The warning message burned bright on my phone screen, its cold, clinical font mocking the fire that had ignited inside me. "We know where you are. Leave or lose everything." There was no signature, no name, just a threat etched in digital ink, precise and merciless. The dim glow of the safe house's single lamp flickered as rain drummed relentlessly against the cracked window pane. Outside, the city churned, oblivious to the war unfolding in its shadows. But inside these four walls, the fight was more personal than ever. I sat rigidly in the worn leather chair, the weight of the message settling on my chest like a stone. The silence was thick, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of an ancient clock on the wall. Each tick counted down toward an uncertain future, every second a reminder that the stakes had just been raised. Mira paced slowly across the room, her expression unreadable. She stopped beside me, her hand brushing the back of my neck, a rare softness in her fierce gaze. "They want to scare you," she said quietly. "But we can turn this around. Use their fear against them." Her words offered a fragile lifeline, a flicker of hope in the dark. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. The plan took shape quickly, a carefully orchestrated strike aimed at dismantling the conspirators' grip on the airline from within. Elias was already at work, digging into financial records and corporate secrets, exposing the rot beneath the glittering facade. I spent hours rehearsing my role, mastering the language of power, polished words, commanding presence, subtle manipulation. This was a game of shadows, where every move could tip the balance. The night of the board meeting arrived, the arena where the puppeteers pulled strings and fortunes were won or lost. Dressed in tailored black, I stepped into the glass tower that housed the empire that had tried to bury me. The elevator ascended slowly, each floor a battlefield in itself. My reflection stared back at me from the mirrored walls, a woman transformed. No longer the victim, but a contender. Inside the grand boardroom, the room hummed with tension. Faces familiar and hostile turned toward me, eyes narrowing like daggers. The scarred man and the dark-haired woman sat at the far end, their smirks faltering as I took my place at the head of the table. I spoke calmly, every word measured and deliberate. "You underestimated me. You tried to erase me, but I'm here, not just as a survivor, but as a force you cannot ignore." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. The stakes were clear. This was no longer a whisper campaign. This was a declaration of war. Behind the cold veneer of corporate politics, alliances shifted like sand. Elias's revelations hit like a tsunami, exposing illicit dealings and corrupt backroom deals. Board members exchanged wary glances, some eager to distance themselves, others plotting their own moves. The scarred man's jaw tightened, the woman's eyes flashed with fury. But I held their gaze unflinchingly. After hours of battle in words and wills, the tide began to turn. By the end of the meeting, it was clear, the old order was crumbling. I left the tower that night feeling a strange mixture of triumph and exhaustion. The war was far from over, but for the first time, the path forward was mine to walk. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city breathed beneath a sky heavy with promise and danger. And I was ready. The victory at the boardroom was only the beginning. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the city's pulse felt different, quicker, sharper, more dangerous. The rain had ceased, but the storm inside me was only intensifying. Lights flickered in the distance, casting fractured shadows across the wet pavement. Every reflection seemed to conceal a watcher, every whisper carried the threat of betrayal. The battlefield had shifted from polished conference rooms to the tangled streets where power was earned and lost in silence. Back at the safe house, Elias and Mira awaited my return. Their faces, etched with exhaustion and resolve, mirrored my own. "We've stirred the hornet's nest," Elias said grimly. "They won't let this go quietly?" Mira nodded, her eyes cold and calculating. "They're mobilizing assets, shutting down communications, tightening their grip." I felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on my shoulders. My rebellion had sparked a war, one that would demand sacrifices I wasn't sure I was ready to make. Days passed in a blur of whispered meetings, encrypted messages, and evasive maneuvers. Every step forward was met with new obstacles. Loyalists deployed to sabotage, allies turning traitor under pressure. One night, as I reviewed plans beneath the dim light of a single lamp, the phone rang, a harsh, grating sound that shattered the fragile quiet. The voice on the other end was cold, unmistakably familiar. "You think you've won?" It hissed. "You're playing with fire. Stop now, or watch everything burn." The line went dead. The warning was clear, but it only fueled my resolve. I was no longer the woman who had lost her passport and her freedom. I was becoming a force, relentless, unyielding, and prepared to fight until the last breath. Yet even as the power struggle escalated, a quiet moment of light emerged. Elias, once merely an ally in shadows, began to reveal a depth of care that transcended the battlefield. In stolen glances and fleeting touches, I sensed a connection, a fragile hope amid the chaos. But love in a war zone was a dangerous game. Trust was scarce, and betrayal lurked close. As the city held its breath, waiting for the next move, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The shadows were closing in, and only the strongest would survive. The warning had come like a thunderclap, sharp, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. For days, the city's pulse had quickened, its undercurrents roiling with whispers of retaliation. The enemies I had made in the sleek boardrooms and shadowed alleys were not idle. They were gathering their forces, ready to strike back with ruthless precision. But so was I. I stood by the window of our safe house, watching the skyline blur beneath a veil of fog and neon. The rain had returned, a relentless cascade washing over the city, as if nature itself was cleansing the sins buried in the concrete. Elias appeared silently behind me, his presence steady like the anchor I desperately needed. Our hands found each other's, a brief, grounding connection in the chaos. "We can't wait for them to make the next move," he said quietly. "We need to hit first." I turned to face him, the fierce determination in my eyes mirroring his own. Then we burned the darkness down. The plan was daring, risky, a surgical strike against the core of their operations. We would expose their corruption to the world, shatter their control, and reclaim not only my future but the lives they had poisoned. Every detail was plotted meticulously. Mira's network moved like shadows, ready to disrupt communication lines. Elias coordinated with insiders prepared to leak damning evidence. And I, armed with the truth and the unyielding fire of Rebirth, prepared to face the storm head-on. The night of reckoning arrived beneath a moon veiled in clouds. We moved through the city's veins, underground tunnels, forgotten passages, silent streets bathed in street lamp glow. The air was thick with anticipation and danger. Reaching the heart of their operation, a towering data center fortified by steel and secrecy, I felt the pulse of the city itself in my veins. This was where power lived, breathed, and could be broken. With a nod, Elias and Mira slipped into position. I took a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs, steel hardening my resolve. The countdown began. Inside, alarms blared as systems crashed, screens flickered with warning signs, and the fortress of lies began to crumble. Outside, protests sparked in the streets as leaked files surfaced, unveiling greed, betrayal, and manipulation on a scale that shocked the nation. The tide was turning. But the cost was high. As we fled the chaos, gunfire echoed in the distance. Shadows twisted into shapes of enemies closing in. A bullet grazed my arm, a searing reminder that the fight was far from over. But I didn't falter. I was no longer a victim of the past. I was the architect of my future. In the aftermath, as dawn broke over a city awakening to truth and change, I knew the road ahead would be long and perilous. But for the first time, the horizon held more than uncertainty. It held promise. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the heavy haze that still clung to the city streets, remnants of the night's chaos lingering like ghosts. The world outside was waking up to a new reality, one where secrets had been ripped open and lies exposed to the harsh light of truth. I sat at the small kitchen table of the safe house, the fading pain in my arm a dull throb, a constant reminder of the price we'd paid. A battered cup of coffee steamed before me, its bitter aroma a small comfort amid the storm. Across from me, Elias's eyes were sharp, tired, but burning with the same relentless fire that had fueled every step of our journey. "We did it," I whispered, voice hoarse but steady. "We shook their empire." He nodded slowly. "But the fight isn't over. Not yet." The fallout was immediate and sweeping. News outlets seized on the leaked documents, broadcasting scandal after scandal. Executives were suspended, investigations launched, and the boardroom where my enemies once reigned grew restless and fractured. In the midst of this upheaval, an unexpected message arrived, a formal invitation to take my place among the airline's leadership. The same empire that had tried to bury me now offered a seat at the table. Walking into the towering glass building that day, I felt a surge of emotion, pride, anger, and an unshakable resolve. This was my chance not just for revenge, but for redemption. To rebuild, reshape, and reclaim what was rightfully mine. The boardroom was filled with faces both familiar and new. Some eyes widened in surprise, others narrowed with skepticism. But I stood tall, ready. Days turned into weeks as I navigated the treacherous waters of corporate power, wielding influence like a weapon tempered by experience. I uncovered more corruption, implemented sweeping reforms, and built alliances that strengthened my position. Elias remained my steadfast ally, his presence a steadying force amid the storm. And in the quiet moments between battles, our connection deepened, a fragile, powerful bond born of trust and shared struggle. Yet shadows lingered. The scars of betrayal were slow to heal, and enemies still lurked in the corners, waiting for a moment to strike. But I was no longer the woman who had lost everything. I was a phoenix, rising from the ashes. The journey was far from over, but this time, I was in control. The city skyline shimmered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office, a panoramic view that had once been a distant dream. Now, it was my domain. The soft hum of the city below was a reminder of how far I had come, from a lost woman robbed of her freedom to the CEO commanding an empire that had once sought to destroy me. Yet, amidst the victories and the boardroom battles, another war raged within me, a war of the heart. Elias had become more than my ally. His steady presence was a constant in a life that had been upended by betrayal and bloodshed. We were bound by shared secrets, long nights planning the downfall of our enemies, and stolen moments of quiet that tasted like something fragile and precious. But in a world ruled by power and deception, vulnerability was a dangerous gamble. One rainy evening, after a long day of negotiations and strategy meetings, Elias found me alone on the rooftop terrace. The city lights flickered beneath a veil of mist, their reflections shimmering on wet pavement. He approached quietly, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that both comforted and unsettled me. "We've come so far," he began, voice low. "But I can't pretend that this fight hasn't changed us." I nodded, feeling the weight of every loss, every sacrifice. "I don't want to lose you," he confessed, reaching out to brush a wet strand of hair from my face. "Not now, not ever." The world seemed to hold its breath as I looked into his eyes, the man who had stood by me through the darkest hours, who had seen me at my weakest and still believed. "I'm scared," I admitted softly. "Scared of what this means, scared of what might come next." He smiled, a gentle, reassuring curve. "We face it together," he promised. But even as we found solace in each other, the shadows of the past crept closer. Whispers of dissent in the boardroom veiled threats in the night, and an unexpected visitor, a face from my past who held secrets that could unravel everything. The heart's crossfire was as fierce as any corporate battle, and I had to decide where my loyalty truly lay. The unexpected visitor arrived on a gray, drizzling afternoon, the kind of day when the sky seemed to reflect the weight pressing down on my chest. The knock at the door was soft, almost hesitant, but it echoed through the quiet halls of my office with unmistakable urgency. I opened the door to find a man standing there, tall, with a guarded expression and eyes that held shadows I hadn't seen in years. His presence stirred a whirlwind of memories, some better left buried. "Amir," I breathed, the name tasting like ash on my tongue. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his gaze sweeping over the room as if measuring the new empire I now commanded. "I've come with information," he said, voice low but steady. "Information that could change everything, for you and for them." We sat across from each other, the tension thick as he laid out a web of deceit more tangled than I'd imagined. Amir spoke of hidden alliances, double agents embedded deep within the airline's ranks, and betrayals that cut closer than any blade. "Your enemies aren't just the ones you see," he warned. "There are ghosts in your midst. People who will betray you to save themselves." My mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. The leaks, the sabotages, the inexplicable setbacks. Everything suddenly made chilling sense. As Amir spoke, a storm gathered outside, rain pounding against the windows like a drumbeat of fate. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark, flickering light. I realized that to survive this war I would need to trust, but also to watch every shadow. Later, alone in the silence, I pondered the crossroads before me. The visitor from my past had brought truth, but also uncertainty. Trust was fragile, and betrayals sting fresh. Elias's steady hand had been my anchor, but now the tides of deception threatened to pull us apart. In this game of power, love, and revenge, the line between friend and foe blurred. One thing was certain, the fight for my future was far from over, and the secrets unveiled were only the beginning. The days that followed Amir's revelations were a whirlwind of suspicion and unease. Every conversation, every glance felt charged with hidden meanings. Trust, once a fragile bridge, now teetered on the brink of collapse. The boardroom became a battlefield of whispered accusations and veiled threats. Allies I had counted on shifted like shadows, their loyalties uncertain, their eyes flickering with hesitation or cunning. One evening, as the city lights flickered outside my office window, Elias arrived with a grim expression. His usually steady demeanor was fractured by a flicker of doubt. "We've been compromised," he said quietly, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were messages, encrypted, anonymous, but unmistakably linked to someone close. Someone with access, who knew our plans and our vulnerabilities. My heart clenched with betrayal and disbelief. The person who had betrayed us wasn't an enemy lurking in the shadows, it was someone within my trusted circle. The realization cut deeper than any wound, leaving raw, bleeding edges. Determined to confront the truth, I summoned my closest advisors, the faces I had trusted through every trial. One by one, I searched their eyes for signs of guilt, for cracks in their armor. But the real betrayal came when the evidence pointed to someone I never expected. Someone whose smile had always seemed genuine, whose support had been unwavering. Confrontation was inevitable. The air was thick with tension as the accused confessed, their voice trembling between defiance and regret. Their reasons were tangled with fear, desperation, and promises broken. The fallout was brutal but necessary. Trust shattered, alliances reformed, and the path ahead grew even more treacherous. Yet through the pain, I found clarity, a reminder that in this fight, strength was forged not just in victories, but in surviving the betrayals. As the city outside held its breath, I steeled myself for the next battle. The war for the airline, for justice, and for my future was far from over, but I was ready. Stronger than ever. The betrayal had left scars, but it had also illuminated the shadows where my enemies lurked. The boardroom, once a place of whispered schemes and veiled threats, now felt like a crucible, a testing ground for the strength and resilience I had fought so hard to build. I stood before the assembled board, eyes steady, voice clear. We cannot rebuild on foundations of deceit. Trust must be earned, not assumed. The room was silent, every gaze fixed on me, some wary, others begrudgingly respectful. With the evidence we uncovered, we initiated sweeping changes, new security protocols, rigorous audits, and an internal task force dedicated to rooting out corruption. Outside the walls of power, Elias and I found moments of peace amid the storm. Our relationship, tested by fire and betrayal, blossomed into something real, a fragile sanctuary. One evening, beneath the soft glow of city lights, he took my hand. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together." But the fight was far from over. A new threat emerged, one more dangerous and unpredictable than any before. Whispers of a rival faction, poised to exploit the chaos and seize control, reached my ears. The next chapter of this battle was beginning. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The fragile calm was shattered like glass underfoot. Just as we began to stitch the torn fabric of the airline back together, a new, more insidious threat emerged from the depths of the city's underworld. Whispers of a rival faction spread like wildfire. Shadowy figures cloaked in mystery, ruthless and unbound by the rules of corporate warfare. Their ambitions weren't merely to take control, but to reshape the entire landscape in their ruthless image. One late evening, Elias and I sat in the dim light of the safe house, the city's pulse faint beneath the rain against the window. A secure line buzzed, a coded message from Mira. "The Obsidian Circle," Elias muttered, reading the encrypted text. "They're the ones behind the recent sabotage, the blackouts, even the attempts on your life." The name alone carried a weight, a legend whispered in fear by those who knew the dark corridors of power. "They operate like ghosts," Mira had warned. "Invisible, but deadly. Their reach extends beyond the airline, into politics, law enforcement, even media." The realization settled cold and heavy. This wasn't just a corporate battle. It was a war on every front. We had to outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast a foe who thrived in the shadows. In the following weeks, our lives became a relentless game of cat and mouse. Surveillance increased, threats grew bolder, and the line between friend and foe blurred to near invisibility. Every step forward demanded vigilance. Every moment was a fight for survival. Yet amid the mounting danger, Elias's unwavering presence was a beacon in the storm. Our bond deepened, not just partners in battle, but in heart. One quiet night, under a sky scattered with stars, he whispered, "No matter what happens, I'm here, always." I nodded, feeling the fierce promise anchoring me. The battle with the Obsidian Circle would define everything. The future, the airline, and my very life hung in the balance. The Obsidian Circle's grip tightened like a noose around the city, invisible but suffocating. Their influence seeped into every corner, every whisper, every shadow. They moved with calculated precision, striking where we least expected, leaving chaos in their wake. Inside a clandestine warehouse on the city's edge, Mira, Elias, and I gathered with our closest allies. The air was thick with tension, the scent of oil and dust mingling with the electric charge of anticipation. Maps, blueprints, and digital feeds covered the worn tables, each detail scrutinized and dissected. We were preparing for a confrontation that would decide not only the fate of the airline but our very survival. I studied the faces around me, worn but resolute, each carrying the scars of battles fought and losses endured. The stakes had never been higher. Tonight, I declared, voice steady and commanding, we strike back. We expose the Obsidian Circle and reclaim what's ours. The plan was bold: infiltrate their stronghold, gather irrefutable evidence, and dismantle their network from the inside. It was a mission fraught with peril, but retreat was no longer an option. As dusk bled into night, we moved like shadows through the city, hearts pounding, every sense alert. The rain had returned, washing the streets and cloaking us in its cold embrace. Approaching the Obsidian Circle's lair, a fortress disguised as an abandoned factory, I felt a mixture of fear and fierce determination. This was the crucible where fates would be forged or broken. Inside, the air was thick with menace and secrets. Surveillance cameras tracked every movement, guards patrolled with ruthless vigilance, and the hum of hidden machinery pulsed like a heartbeat. We slipped through corridors and shadowed rooms, each step a dance with danger. The evidence we sought lay just beyond reach, a trove of files and digital records that would shatter the Circle's facade. Suddenly, alarms blared. A trap sprung. Chaos erupted as guards swarmed, forcing us into a desperate fight for survival. Blows were exchanged, the sharp crack of weapons ringing out, and the air thick with tension and adrenaline. In the midst of battle, Elias fought fiercely by my side, his presence a shield and strength. Our connection, forged in fire, became an unbreakable bond. When the dust settled, we emerged battered but victorious, clutching the evidence that would bring the Obsidian Circle to its knees. As dawn broke over a city waking to a new day, I knew this was just the beginning. The war for power, justice, and love was far from over. The sun rose over a city transformed. Headlines screamed of corruption uncovered, of the Obsidian Circle's shadow empire crumbling under the weight of truth. The evidence we had risked everything to obtain ignited a revolution. Boardrooms emptied, arrests made, and the airline's foundations shaken to their core. Yet, amid the public spectacle, the real battle continued behind closed doors. The atmosphere in the CEO's office was electric. I stood by the expansive window, watching the city breathe and shift below. The air was thick with expectation and unspoken challenges. Elias entered quietly, his presence grounding. "The media frenzy is just the beginning," he warned. "There will be counterattacks." I nodded, steeling myself. Power had a cost, and the price was never cheap. Amid the whirlwind, Elias and I found stolen moments of tenderness. One evening, beneath the soft glow of the city lights, he took my hand. "We've changed everything," he said softly. "But what about us?" I met his gaze, the weight of the world heavy between us. "We fight for the future, together." But as alliances shifted and enemies regrouped, a new unexpected figure entered the fray, someone from my past whose intentions were cloaked in mystery. Their arrival promised upheaval, forcing me to question everything I thought I knew about loyalty, love, and survival. The revolution was only beginning. And so was the reckoning. The past has a way of sneaking back when you least expect it, like a shadow that stretches long at dusk, silent but impossible to ignore. The door to my office opened without warning, and there stood a figure I hadn't seen in years. A ghost from a life I thought I'd left behind. Her eyes locked onto mine with a mixture of regret and something harder to read: resolve. "Scarlett," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of old wounds. "We need to talk." My heart pounded as memories crashed like waves: betrayal, heartbreak, promises broken. This was the woman who had once been my closest friend and fiercest rival, tangled in the very web of deceit I had fought to escape. "What do you want?" I asked, wary but curious. "I'm here to help," she replied, stepping inside with cautious hope. "Because the enemy we face now is bigger than both of us." Her arrival complicated everything. Alliances shifted, trust fractured, and the fragile piece Elias and I had carved from chaos threatened to shatter. Yet beneath the tension, an undeniable truth emerged: sometimes, survival meant embracing the ghosts of your past. Together, we began to unravel a conspiracy that reached deeper than anyone had imagined, one that could topple governments, control entire industries, and rewrite the city's future. But as the lines between friend and foe blurred, I realized the greatest battle might be within my own heart. The city was no longer a battlefield. It was a canvas waiting for new colors: hope, renewal, and hard-won peace. After months of relentless struggle, betrayals, and battles fought in shadows and boardrooms alike, the storm was finally beginning to break. With the unexpected alliance forged between old rivals, we had unraveled the deepest threads of corruption. The obsidian circle's remnants scattered, their power dismantled piece by piece. The airline, once a symbol of greed and control, was now poised for transformation under my leadership. Sitting in my office, the sunrise spilling golden light across the cityscape, I felt a quiet strength settle over me. Elias stood beside me, a steady hand on my shoulder, not just my partner in battle, but in life. "We made it," he whispered. I nodded, eyes reflecting the dawn. This is only the beginning. There were still challenges ahead, scars to heal, trust to rebuild. But I had learned the most important lesson of all. Rebirth is not just about rising from ashes. It's about choosing who you become. As the city awakened, so did I, ready to lead, to love, and to live on my own terms.